At a time when Africa's destiny hangs in the balance, visionary words, whether imagined or real, have the power to shape hearts and store nations. What you are about to hear is a creative tribute, a powerful reflection of the hopes, struggles, and bold spirit shared by two leaders in the fight for African freedom. Let it awaken something within you as Africa's path to unity and freedom begins. Let's dive into the main message.
My dear brother, President Ibrahim Traore, permit me to write to you not merely as a fellow African leader, but as a concerned son of our continent, a continent rich in soul, in spirit, and in strength, yet one that has endured far too much pain, too much betrayal, and too many broken promises. Today I extend this message not only in the spirit of solidarity, but taught in the pursuit of something greater, the awakening of Africa's true potential. You do not know me personally, but we are bonded by something deeper than titles or borders. We are both sons of a land that has for too long been undermined, misunderstood, and misrepresented. We are both men who have dared to speak when silence became too dangerous. And we are both leaders who believe that justice, integrity, and the will of the people must shape the new face of Africa. When I look at what you are trying to achieve in Burkina Faso, reclaiming sovereignty, demanding dignity, and defending your people, I do not see rebellion, I see courage. I see a young man standing against the tides of history that have too often swept our nations into the shadows of dependency and submission. Africa is changing, and that change is long overdue. But change without unity becomes noise, and noise without vision becomes chaos. That is why I write to you, President Traore, not to offer advice, but to offer brotherhood, not to dictate, but to affirm that your voice is not alone, that across this continent there are men and women who believe, like you do, that Africa must rise by its own hand. I come from Nigeria, a nation as complex and challenging as any on this continent. I have walked through the fire of elections, of resistance, of ridicule. I have been told to sit down, to be quiet, to wait for my turn. But I have learned, as you are learning, that waiting is the luxury of those who are comfortable with how things are. We do not have that luxury. You have dared to ask difficult questions. Who owns our land? Who controls our gold? Who decides the destiny of African children? And most importantly, why must African dignity be a negotiation? I have followed your speeches. I have seen the way young people across Africa respond to your boldness. They chant your name not because you promise them riches, but because you offer them hope, raw, unfiltered, and unapologetic. Let me be clear. That hope must not be allowed to die. You are not perfect. None of us are. But what sets you apart is that you are not pretending. You are not sitting behind velvet curtains pretending not to see the tears in your people's eyes. You are not measuring progress by the applause of foreign newspapers. You are measuring it by the safety of your villages, the strength of your farmers, the dignity of your mothers. And for that I commend you. There is a new spirit rising across Africa, a spirit of sovereignty, of dignity, of fearless leadership. That spirit cannot be sustained by one man or one country. It must be a coalition of conscience, a brotherhood of believers, believers in the African possibility. I do not write to flatter you, President Traore. I write to encourage, to affirm, and to say to you, keep going. Your people are watching. Your continent is watching. And yes, the world is watching too. Let your choices be wise, your heart be firm, and your hands be clean. For leadership in Africa has rarely been about titles. It has always been about legacy. And that is what I pray you are building, not just the government, but a legacy of truth, of courage, and of justice. As I reflect on the nature of leadership in Africa, I find myself constantly returning to a single truth. We are not free until we are all free. Our struggles may wear different names. In Burkina Faso, it is the weight of imposed control. In Nigeria, it is the weight of corruption and broken trust. Yet both are symptoms of the same disease. A system that has for decades denied Africans the right to determine their own future. You and I, though we stand in different rooms, face the same storm. I have seen what happens when the soul of a nation is sold to the highest bidder, when contracts are signed not for, but for dependency. I have watched powerful institutions, some within and some beyond our shores, treat Africa not as a partner, but as a pawn. This is not speculation. It is a lived reality. And you have called it out boldly in a world that prefers leaders who whisper. But we must not whisper. We must speak loudly, firmly, truthfully. Your insistence on reclaiming control over Burkina Faso's resources, gold, land, and dignity is not just a local struggle. It is symbolic. It sends a message that Africa is awakening. It is a reminder that every natural resource is not merely a commodity, but a covenant, a sacred trust between the earth and its people. I want you to know, President Traore, that many Africans hear you. Some may not speak, yet fear still holds them hostage. But your defiance, grounded in principle, is breaking the chains of silence. You have made it possible again for a leader to stand before his people and say, we will not bow, we will not beg, we will build deep. This is the kind of leadership Africa has lacked for too long. Leadership that is not about pride, but about purpose. Leadership that does not trade sovereignty for sponsorship. Leadership that answers not to foreign interests, but to the heartbeat of its own people. We both know it is not easy. The path you walk is filled with threats, traps, and temptations. The pressure to compromise is constant. The voices telling you to slow down or be realistic are many. But let me remind you of something. Every generation has its appointed one. A person who refuses to bow so others may rise. Your burden is heavy, yes, but it is not in vain. There are youth in Nigeria who speak your name with reverence, not because they know your every policy, but because they recognize in you something we all been longing for, authenticity. That is your greatest strength, and it must never be diluted. The world will try to reshape you, to rebrand your story, to label you as a rebel, an extremist, a radical. But remember, this history rarely remembers the obedient. It remembers the bold. And bold you have been. Africa is not a weak continent. It is a wounded one. But wounds can heal if dressed with truth, with justice, and with leadership that serves not roles. I urge you, my brother, to hold fast to the values that called you to serve justice for the common man, equity for the forgotten, and dignity for the African soul. Those values are the true currency of power. Not military strength, not foreign aid, but moral authority. The power that comes when a leader is aligned with the will of his people. Do not fear criticism. Let it shape you, not shake you. For as long as your hands remain clean and your motives remain pure, your legacy will outlive every slander, every rumor, every attempt to discredit your mission. Leadership is not about building palaces. It is about building people. And I believe you are doing just that. So from Nigeria to Burkina Faso, from one African brother to another, I say, stay the course. The winds will rage, but the ground is shifted. Africa is watching. Africa is learning, and Africa is rising. I speak to you today not only as a fellow public servant, but as someone who knows the loneliness that comes, can come with choosing the hard path, the just path. There is a weight that comes with leadership. It is not the weight of titles or the ceremonies. It is the weight of conscience. It is the burden of knowing that every decision you make can either lift a village or tumble, crush a generation. And when you choose truth over comfort, when you refuse to be manipulated by the powerful forces that once dictated our fate, you will find yourself isolated, misunderstood, even demonized. But that is the price of transformation. You have taken bold steps, refusing to mortgage your nation's sovereignty for temporary applause. You have decided to walk the rough road of self-reliance instead of the smooth path of dependency. And while others whisper that you are too young, too radical, too unyielding, I stand here today to tell you, you are exactly what this continent needs. You have rekindled the fire Pan-Africanism, not the theoretical kind taught in textbooks, but the living, breathing kind that calls for sweat, discipline, and relentless courage. I have always believed that integrity, not ambition, is what defines a man's legacy. And you, President Traore, are building your legacy not through the lens of media narratives, but through the eyes of your people, those who walk barefoot to cast their trust in you, those who sing your name not because you promised them riches, but because you gave them hope. Hope is a powerful thing, my brother. And in this moment, you are not merely governing a country, you are guarding a vision. The vision of an Africa that is not dictated to not label, developing as though we are children waiting for permission to grow, a vision of an Africa that stands shoulder to shoulder with the world, not begging, but building. But we must be clear. Truth tellers have never had an easy path. Every time you question the status quo, you disrupt the systems that benefit from our peoples and suffering. Every time you demand transparency, you shine a light where many prefer darkness. And for that there will be pushback from within and from outside. But do not lose heart. You are not the first to be misunderstood. The great leaders before us, Sankara, Nkrumah, Lumumba, they too were branded as threats simply because they dared to love their people too deeply. But history remembers them not as radicals, but as visionaries, and it will remember you the same. What gives me hope is at this time we are not walking alone across the continent. Young Africans are rising, more connected, more conscious, more unwilling to be deceived. They are not waiting for permission to act. They are organizing, educating, innovating. They are the ones who chant your name from the streets of Bogo Dioulasso to the campuses of Lagos. They do not need to understand every policy. They can feel your intent, and they are ready to defend a future that is finally theirs. You and I, President Traore, are part of a larger story, the generation of leaders who must redefine what it means to serve. No longer is it about handshakes and headlines. It is about clean hands and clear hearts. Let us not confuse popularity with purpose. Let us not bend our principles to please institutions that were never built with us in mind. Let us not waste our energy fighting for seats at tables that were never meant for us. Instead, let us build new tables, African tables with African values, African priorities, and African dignity at their center. I extend this hand of brotherhood to you, not as a political gesture, but as a commitment to unity, a unity rooted not in convenience, but in conviction. Because in this hour, Africa does not need more politicians. Africa needs builders, protectors, servants. You, President Traore, are not walking alone. We are many, and we have liberty. When I speak of sovereignty, I do not merely refer to flags or anthems. I speak of something far deeper, the right of a people to choose their path, to own their resources, to define their future without manipulation or team. Sovereignty is not a gift, it is a right. And yet, for far too long, Africa has been treated as though our sovereignty is conditional, subject to approval, restricted by dependency, and diluted by the weight of external interests. But you, my brother, have chosen to reawaken this sacred right, to remind the world that Burkina Faso, like every other African nation, is not a pawn, but a proud and powerful participant in its own story. Your stance has reignited an energy many thought lost. When you reclaim the dignity of your land, your resources, and your military, you send a message that rippled far beyond your borders. Africa is not for sale. Not its minerals, not its mines, not its dreams. I commend that spirit. It is the spirit our forefathers envisioned when they fought for touch or independence, not just from colonial rulers, but from the very mindset that told us we were not enough on our own. President Traore, I have always believed that the wealth of Africa lies not in what lies beneath her soil, but in the strength of her people. And for the first time in a long while, I see that strength rising again. It rises in the young entrepreneurs building solutions without waiting for international aid. It rises in the farmers reclaiming ancestral knowledge to feed our nations. It rises in our musicians, our scientists, our thinkers, bold, African, and proud. The old narrative was that Africa needed saving, but that story has expired. Now Africa needs space to grow on her own terms. I say this often in my own country, and I say it again now. We must break the cycle of dependency. No continent can rise when its policies are dictated by the approval of foreign financial institutions. No country can thrive when its budget priorities are decided in distant boardrooms. We must rethink what development means. Is it development if our roads are paved, but our youth are unemployed? Is it development if we export raw materials and import finished products at 10 times the cost? Is it development if we borrow money to build bridges that lead nowhere while our schools collapse? These are the questions we must ask, not because we are anti-progress, but because we demand true progress, one that is rooted in justice, equity, and sustainability. Your leadership, President Traore, is forcing these conversations to the forefront. And I urge you, do not let the noise of criticism drown out the quiet affirmation of history. What you are building is bigger than any single nation. You are showing us all that courage is contagious, that one leader's conviction can inspire a continent's awakening. But this awakening must be managed with wisdom. We must not fall into the trap of anger for anger's sake. Our mission is not revenge, but restoration, not rebellion without purpose, but resistance with clarity. And that is where strategy becomes essential. Let us train our minds as deeply as we train our soldiers. Let us invest in our teachers as passionately as we invest in our defense. Let us build systems that are not only resistant to exploitation, but resilient in vision. It is not enough to reclaim our sovereignty. We must also redefine it. Sovereignty is not just the right to resist. It is the power to create, to innovate, to collaborate on our terms, to design solutions for foreign people with the same confidence as any other nation. Let this be the season where Africa no longer apologizes for choosing herself. Let this be the era where sovereignty is more than a slogan. It is our shared standard. Together we are reclaiming not just power, but purpose. If there is one truth that binds every African nation today, it is this: our continent is young, not merely in age, but in spirit, in potential, in drive. Yet, for too long, the youth of Africa have been treated not as partners in progress, but as problems to be managed as if their energy is dangerous and their ambition inconvenient. But we both know the truth. The African youth is not a burden. He is our greatest blessing. Our greatest currency is not the gold beneath our soil or the diamonds that sparkle in our rivers. It is the brilliance in our classrooms, the fire in our streets, and the innovation in our minds. It is a young girl who dreams of becoming a scientist, and the young man determined to build the next global tech empire from his village. It is the millions of silent thinkers who only need one opportunity, not a handout, but a hand up. President Traore, when I look at what you are doing, I see a leader who has not only listened to the youth, you have given them a seat at the table. You have said clearly and without apology, Africa belongs to those who believe in her enough to fight for her. And the youth, long silenced and underestimated, are now standing with you, not because of empty slogans, but because you reflect their hope. That hope is powerful, but it must be protected, because hope without structure becomes frustration. Passion without opportunity becomes protest. And energy without vision can be manipulated, even weaponized. That is why I urge every African leader watching this moment in history to understand what you are modeling. President Traore, you are not afraid of the youth. You are investing in them, empowering them, entrusting them. And it is time we do the same across our continent. We must invest not just in military equipment, but in classrooms. We must create not just roads, but platforms for creativity. We must prioritize not just GDP numbers, but the number of young people with access to opportunity. Because no nation can rise when half its population is told to wait their turn indefinitely. And to the youth, I say this: leadership is not a gift reserved for the elite. It is a responsibility for the prepared. Your anger is valid, but channel it. Your frustration is real, but sharpen it. Do not let pain turn to bitterness. Let it turn into purpose. President Traore, you are showing the youth that resistance can be righteous and leadership can be honorable. You are showing that power does not have to corrupt it, can protect, it can build. Let us build with the youth, not without them. Let us fund their dreams as aggressively as we once borrowed for imports. Let us see their questions as signs of critical thinking, not rebellion. Let us replace dismissiveness with dialogue, and most of all, let us make decisions with them, not just for them, because the future of Africa will not be shaped by those who are comfortable with the status quo. It will be shaped by those courageous enough to disrupt it for good. And right now, that courage is rising in our young people. Let us rise with them. Let us teach them the lessons we have learned, but also trust them to write the next chapters we could never imagine. President Traore, your example is awakening a generation. May they never return to slumber. Let us move from managing the youth to mobilizing them. Let us go from ignoring them to investing in them. Let this be the moment where Africa stops outsourcing its future and starts owning it. Together, we can ignite a fire that generations will thank us for. There is a question that haunts many African thinkers, business leaders, and even everyday citizens. Why does a continent so rich in resources remain so poor in outcomes? It is a question that cuts across borders and ideologies, and it leads us to a painful but necessary truth. Africa's economic reality has for too long been one of dependency. We depend on others to fund our budgets. We depend on imports to feed our people. We depend on the decisions of external powers to dictate the direction of our currencies, our policies, and our industries. This dependency is not by accident. It was engineered through decades of structural manipulation, conditional loans, trade imbalance, and policies that discourage local production in favor of foreign consumption. But President Traore, something is changing. Under your leadership, we are witnessing a conscious rejection of this status quo. You have shown us that self-sufficiency is not just a dream. It is a decision, and that decision begins by asking the hard questions. Why must we borrow what we already own in abundance? Why must our farmers struggle when our lands are so fertile? Why are our people unemployed while foreign companies extract billions from our soil? These are not anti-global questions. These are pro-Africa questions. We must understand sovereignty is not just political. It is economic, and economic sovereignty begins when prioritize value-added production over raw exports. encourage local entrepreneurship over foreign dependence, protect our industries without isolating our neighbors, invest in intra-African trade rather than eternal export chains. Africa is not poor, we are poorly managed. Our economies have been tied to commodity prices, external currencies, and loan agreements we had no role in writing. But we now have an opportunity to rewrite the script. You, President Traore, are already doing this. You have taken bold steps, sometimes unpopular ones, to keep wealth circulating within your borders, to give your people a stake in the economy they sustain, to ensure that when gold is extracted, it benefits more than a boardroom in another continent. This model is not perfect. No new path is, but it is ours, and it is courageous. Now, imagine what happens when more African nations follow suit. Imagine a continent where we no longer line up for aid, but stand united in trade. Imagine if our central banks spoke not just to foreign creditors, but to one another, forging monetary policies that stabilize us from within. Imagine our currencies backed by the full faith of our productivity, not the dictates of former empires. This is not fantasy, it is strategy, and it is long overdue. To build this new economic order, we must do a few things quickly. One, educate our people economically. Financial literacy is as vital as political awareness to audit and renegotiate harmful trade agreements. Our sovereignty cannot be for sale. Three, create continental investment funds that support African businesses. Let our own people finance our future. Four, promote Pan-African logistics and digital infrastructure. If we can't move goods and services within Africa efficiently, we are not yet free. President Traore, I believe history will record your defiance, not as rebellion, but as realignment. You are not just challenging the old system, you are building a new one. And I say this to every young African entrepreneur, every trader in the market, every farmer in the village. The time has come to believe in African business. Support it, strengthen it, build with it. Our continent is not a project to be pitied. It is a powerhouse waiting to be activated. And the world must now come to Africa, not as charity workers, but as partners on our terms with mutual respect. We must move from economic survival to economic sovereignty. Let us break the chains of dependence and in their place build bridges of self-reliance. There is a spirit that burns within the heart of every African youth, a fire that refuses to die. Despite decades of marginalization, unemployment, conflict, and neglect, this fire is not just ambition, it is dignity. It is the yearning to be seen, to be heard, and to contribute meaningfully to the building of their nations. It is the refusal to accept a future of mediocrity when greatness is possible. It is the unshakable belief that Africa's story does not end in struggle, but in triumph. But for this to happen, we must first confront an uncomfortable truth. Our leaders have failed the youth. We have spoken about change, but practiced stagnation. We have built palaces, but left schools in ruins. We have held summits on development, while graduates roam the streets without jobs. We have praised our ancestors, yet ignored the potential of our descendants. President Traore, your youthfulness in leadership is itself a form of resistance, a resistance against the narrative that age alone equals wisdom, or that you must wait their turn until time runs out. You have become a symbol of what is possible when the voice of a new generation refuses to be silenced. But even as you stand bold in your convictions, I know you are aware. Leadership is not a crown. It is a cross. To carry the hopes of millions is to carry a burden heavy with expectation, one that demands discipline, transparency, and above all, accountability. It is not enough to shout against injustice. We must also govern justly. It is not enough to criticize corruption. We must eradicate it from within. It is not enough to blame external forces. We must police our own consciences. Our youth are watching us. They do not need perfect leaders. They need honest ones. Leaders who admit failure, correct mistakes, and prioritize people over politics. I believe that true leadership is measured not in how long you serve, but in how well you serve. And that means putting education at the center of our national agendas. We must invest in schools, not just stadiums, in libraries, not just legislation, in science and innovation, not only slogans, because the next revolution will not be fought with guns, it will be fought with ideas, with coding skills, with clean energy solutions, and with youth who know who they are and what they are capable of. Let us empower them, not intimidate them. Let us give them the tools to build, not just survive. And above all, let us lead by example, because when youth see hypocrisy, they lose hope. But when they see integrity, they rise. President Traore, your example is already stirring a wave of consciousness across Africa, and we must protect this wave from being hijacked by those who seek power without purpose. Let us together declare the era of empty leadership is over. We must train our young people to govern, to think, to build, and to dream beyond borders. Because Africa's salvation will not come from conferences or communiques, it will come from classrooms, clean elections, ethical leadership, and active citizens. And to every African youth listening, you are not the leaders of tomorrow. You are the change makers of today. We see you, we believe in you, and we are committed to creating a continent where you no longer have to flee to thrive, where you no longer have to beg to be seen. Africa belongs to you, not just in words, but in action. President Traore, I thank you for reminding us that leadership is a sacred trust. Let us not betray it. We stand today not just as leaders of nations, but as the custodians of an identity that has been misrepresented, undervalued, and often silenced in the global dialogue, the African identity. We have been told that Africa is a continent of need, a place of poverty, war, and dependency. We have watched this foreign narratives painted us either as victims to be rescued or as markets to be exploited. But what they fail to recognize, or perhaps what they choose to ignore, is that Africa is also a continent of power. Power, not just in our minerals, or our oil, or our land, but power in our people. Africa is home to the world's youngest population, This is not a burden, it is our greatest asset. Yet too often our youth are told to wait for reforms, wait for employment, wait for the trickle down of development from institutions that have never truly prioritized them. But President Traore, I believe what you and I both know to be true. Africa cannot afford to wait any longer. We must reclaim our voice in the global order, not by begging for inclusion, but by building strong systems at home that demand respect abroad. This is why economic independence must become our next frontier. Not independence in name, but in practice. For far too long, our economies have been shaped by the conditionalities of institutions that do not walk our streets, that do not feel our hunger, and that do not understand our aspirations. They speak of loans and development, but behind every offer is a fine print of control. Let us be clear. Debt is not aid. It is a chain, silent but suffocating. It is time we speak boldly, not in hostility, but in honesty, that Africa must transition from being a borrower to becoming a builder. We must prioritize intra-African trade over external dependence. We must develop regional industries that turn our raw materials into refined wealth. We must train our youth not just to seek jobs, but to create them. President Traore, I have followed your stance on these matters with great admiration. You have reminded the world that gold mined in our soil should not only decorate palaces abroad, it must first build hospitals, schools, and homes in Burkina Faso and across Africa. You have spoken with clarity where others have chosen caution. And though the path you walk is not easy, it is necessary. Because when we depend on others for our survival, we give them the power to define our worth. We must not just decolonize our institutions. We must decolonize our minds. We must teach our children that their future does not lie in migration, but in innovation. We must remind our leaders that serving foreign interests at the expense of local dignity is a betrayal of the very oath of tie they took. This is not about isolationism. It is about negotiating from strength, not desperation. We must speak with one African voice, not a chorus of competing interests. We must ensure that when the world sits at the table, Africa is no longer on the menu, but is part of the meal plan. To do this, we need leaders who understand that economic freedom is political freedom in disguise. Leaders who will choose transparency over transactions. Leaders who will choose people over profit. And I believe that in this, you have started a movement that cannot be reversed. I stand with you, not because we agree on everything, but because we share the same fundamental belief that Africa can govern itself, that Africa can feed itself, that Africa can lead itself with dignity, with integrity, and with power. To all watching and listening, let us remember, Africa will rise not when the world gives us permission, but when we give ourselves permission to rise. President Traore, may your courage ignite courage in others. And may our generation be the one that finally chooses the harder right over, the easier road. As I bring this letter to a close, I must remind myself, and I remind you, that this is not just a message between two men. This is a message between generations. This is not merely a correspondence between Nigeria and Burkina Faso. It is a sacred declaration from one soul of Africa to another. It is the echo of centuries of struggle. It is the cry of ancestors who dreamed of a continent that could be free, prosperous, and sovereign. President Traore, when you rose to speak against the injustice of foreign manipulation, and many feared for your boldness, but even more were inspired by it, your actions have awakened millions, not to rage, but to rethink, not to violence, but to vision, not to rebellion, but to reconstruction. And that, my brother, is where we must lead from now, reconstruction. The Africa we dream of will not be built by words alone. It will be built by action, coordination, and commitment. It will be built when we replace envy among nations with partnership. When we end tribal divisions with continental purpose, when we move from military coups to economic revolutions, because no matter how many speeches we give, if the child in Bamako, the farmer in Kano, the nurse in Lusaka, or the teacher in Addis still feels abandoned, then we have not fulfilled our duty. Let us not be leaders of rhetoric. Let us be leaders of results. In the coming years, we must build African-centered institutions that regulate trade, tech, education, and health, rooted in our values. Protect our natural resources with policies that put our people first. Equip our youth with education that fosters critical thinking, not colonial repetition. Forge pacts with one another, African to African, forge innovation, security, and shared prosperity. And when we speak to the world, let us speak not as fractured nations, but as one federation of purpose. A unified voice is strategic voice, a confident voice, a voice that tells the world Africa is no longer asking for a seat at the table. We are building our own, one built on justice, transparency, fairness, and respect. President Traore, as I watch your leadership unfold, I know we are in a defining moment, and I stand with you, not behind, not ahead, but beside you. Together, let us ignite a Pan-African vision that transcends our lifetimes. Let us be the generation that history remembers, not for what we said, but for what we built. Let us refuse to pass on broken systems to our children. Let us pass down a new Africa, not perfect, but progressing, not feared, but respected, not dependent, but decisively sovereign. To our youth watching this message, I say to you, do not wait for miracles from abroad. You are the miracle. You are the answer to our prayers. The dream of Nkiruma Sankara Lumumba, he lives in you. Rise, think boldly, work ethically, stand courageously. Africa needs you. President Traore, thank you for igniting a spark that has now turned it into a flame that lights up every village, every city, every border of this beautiful continent. From the heart of Nigeria to the heartbeat of Burkina Faso, I salute you. May we lead, not for applause, but for posterity. With unwavering hope, Peter Obi